through the help of high-paid lawyers and image consultants from Hollywood, California, from New York City, from Chicago, Illinois, from Atlanta, Georgia, fancy lawyers and consultants in imagery from Harvard and Yale and Princeton, and a few from other big schools like Duke and Wake Forest and Emory. A positive public image, brandishing and polishing into a luminosity through self-serving press releases and media TV spin doctrine. However, the real characters often get revealed through their personal actions, which are far behind the spotlight of Foggy Bottom and Capitol Hill and Congress, the White House, Chicago and New York and Hollywood, far from the spotlight. Most assuredly, persons behind the scenes write those speeches. Moral and ethical decisions are polished by their entourage of lawyers and speechwriters. Yet, these polished leaders and politicians and media celebrities have their issues with fidelity and fundamental honesty in their relationships and in their personal business dealings. After all, light illuminates the darkness that evil and unjust minds of business and political interest and law interest and media interest and selling newspapers and media events that operate on the borders of a razor's edge. And what really goes on is something outside of polite or ethical society. I always thought that Christians could teach those politicians and big Fortune 500 companies and a thing or two about creating a positive image in the real world. Christians normally focus on certain appealing aspects of God's character: love, hope, grace, forgiveness, compassion, mercy, yet underplay or ignore those biblical passages, especially in the Old Testament, some in the New, that seem to reveal a more troubling aspects if we get down into the text. Now, when you look at those little preached-on subjects, the stories of massacres, bloodshed, war, chaos, God is seen in a quite different light, especially to deep thinkers and intellectuals, the Ivy League schools and elite schools across the nation. Yet politicians on all branches, like Clinton, Nixon, FDR, and senators like Hart, Edwards, Wiener, Mills, Jennerette, whose carefully and meticulously crafted perfect public personalities fall apart once credible stories of dastardly deeds and extramarital affairs are documented, and people see them for what they are. Wish they did not ever vote these people into leadership or office, or even buy stock in their company. I think what impressed me more as a little child was I heard a lady who had been through hell itself in World War II. Her name was Corrie ten Boom. Just nod your head if you've heard of her, or read one of her books, or heard her speak. You can still find her on YouTube, usually short videos. Or maybe you've heard about that book called Unbroken, about Louis Zapparetti's time after crashing in a World War II plane doing a rescue search, and it fell apart. Engines fell apart and they crashed in. He spent a long time, weeks and weeks, just him and two other fellas, before washing up on shore and the Japanese capturing the two survivors and transporting them to prison camp where they were mercilessly beaten, shamed, and berated and worked to death by the imperial forces of Japan. That story called Unbroken, written by a lady, but based on his earlier book, is very powerful. I read it when a nurse gave it to me to read in Afghanistan, and I read it in about 3 days of easy reading in the afternoon. I turned it back to that nurse, which sadly that nurse died, and I had services for that nurse. I believe the only nurse that had died in Afghanistan up to that time in 2012. And he was a good guy. The night before I visited him, and he was working in a trauma center with the Afghani children who had died who were dying from injuries, from IEDs. And he was showing them Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck cartoons. It didn't matter that they spoke Darya, Pashtun, and Mickey and Donald Duck and Goofy were in English. But when I went to bed after grabbing I think it was a ice cream sandwich that he had hidden away in a freezer back there for me so I could get one occasionally, I said hello to all the kids and what little Darya I knew, and asked him how one or two of them that had lost one arm, two arms, were doing, talked to the father, and said a prayer to my God for the compassion of the child who was about to die. Now that nurse died the next morning when I was awoke, very suddenly, of a heart attack. I think of the people that I contacted when I was in university, and my professor taught me to do a paper on the plight of the Jews of the Holocaust. And I had so many letters coming in from the Yad Vashem in Tel Aviv, and from Dachau, and from historical researchers in Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia at the time, that my father was concerned of all these letters coming in was going to some way affect our family, and the postman might tell somebody that I was getting, their son in college was getting letters from historians and museums from communist countries, but inside it talked about individuals that had survived the concentration camps of Germany that were Jewish, and other people that were religious but spoke out in their churches about the evil that was going on in the 30s. And many people, of course, left to escape to other nations in the midst of all of that, and churches just didn't talk about it. Politicians didn't talk about it. FDR sent 5,000 people, refugees, in 2 different ships back to Europe, of which about 40-something% of each ship ended up in the concentration camps because Cuba wouldn't take them, Mexico wouldn't take them, the United States wouldn't take them. Look it up. Louis Zapparini was an interesting character. He had a brother that never got into trouble, and he just followed trouble all his life. And he got talked by a coach to run in track, and he found out after a while that he could beat his brother and beat almost everyone, and he got to make the Olympic team and got to go to Germany for the Berlin Olympics. And he grew up there in California, and we all know with California things are kind of crazy out there. California people. He even tried to snag a Nazi flag down and was caught by a bunch of brown shirts and people and hauled before some representatives. And it could have been mighty bad. He managed to talk his way out of that, apologized profusely. He ran his race, and he did not win, but he did run his race and went on in his life. And I won't tell you too much about that. I want you to read that book. He was impacted after the war by Billy Graham, former Presbyterian. Baptists claim him too, and a lot of churches do. Lived on a hill not too far away. Used to preach right through these areas, right in here. You probably might have heard him preach. And he wanted to go back, Zapparini wanted to go back to forgive the Japanese captors that beat him up, that tried to kill him, that tried to kill a lot of his friends. Wanted to forgive him personally. He found some people that were prisoners, that were treated prisoners badly, and told them that he forgave them. And they were very shocked of that, because they thought for sure he was going to destroy them and their families for what they had done under the flag of the imperial troops of the Emperor of Japan at that time. A message from Billy Graham in California struck his wife's heart, and his wife drug him out to hear a young Billy Graham preach. And it was so powerful, it changed his life. God's Spirit can change people's lives so powerfully. We can't solve the problems and the wars around the world because there's so many of them. Our nation cannot be a world peacemaker of the level it has been financially. Economically, it is not possible. We failed in Washington and across our states where we think we can still do that. We cannot. It must be greater people and greater nations taking greater interest in other nations. And the UN will not. It is not the solution to those wars, because no major Western nation wants to put their troops under UN control, but under their own flag and own generals' control. So there will always be wars and rumors of wars. There will always be war along the Gaza and in Africa, especially where there's oil, and in Asia, especially where there's oil, and the Islamic Federation and the OPEC nations will continue to manipulate things to be in their interest because of the fascination of making money for oil and gas. And those that haul the oil and gas and process the oil and gas, and the Americans, the Canadians, the South Americans, the Europeans, the Russians, all of them want a bigger and bigger slot.